Hello everybody, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of the best budget gaming CPUs out there. It's the i7-4790, and even though it came out 9 years ago, its $40 price point and performance in modern games makes it an exceptionally good deal. We're going to be taking a look at how it holds up in a few different titles, and I've got the video split up into chapters if you want to skip ahead. But for now, we've got to find out what exactly made this processor so good. The i7-4790, released back in May of 2014, was a part of Intel's 4th generation Haswell processors. It was one of the fastest CPUs in the world. Now, Intel used something called a tick-tock model. No, not the stupid app. It's a production model that guided their approach to releasing new processors. Essentially, every microarchitecture change was called a tock and was followed by a die shrink of the process technology known as a tick. So, as part of the tock phase, Haswell brought forth a new architecture, but didn't shrink the lithography like Ivy Bridge did. As a part of this architecture, Intel also released what they called an integrated voltage regulator, which was placed on the CPU. Previously, the voltage regulator model, the VRM, was located on the motherboard, but for Haswell, Intel moved the function to the die, which allowed for finer control and more efficient power delivery to the processor. And the 4790 was sure to take advantage of this, offering top-notch performance with a TDP of only 84 watts. Unfortunately, you can overclock this processor, but the one we have has a base clock of only 3.6 GHz, but does have a single core boost up to 4. Now, there was a bunch of different versions of this processor, namely the 4790K, S, and T. The K was unlocked and was by far the most capable. The non-suffixed version was the base model we have, while the S and the T variants came with lower TDPs and subsequently lower clock speeds and worse performance. However, they all had 8 MB of L3 cache using the Intel Smart Cache technology. Essentially, it just shared the cache memory between all the cores of the multi-core CPU. On a related note, Haswell was also the first architecture to feature an L4 cache. This was only present on the R variants of a few different CPUs, but goes to show just how advanced the architecture was. Another feature that makes this chip fantastic was the inclusion of hyperthreading. This allowed for a single physical processor core to behave like 2 logical cores by executing multiple software threads simultaneously. So even though there's only 4 physical cores, logically it acts like an 8-core CPU. But it had competition, AMD's FX series. Now, back in the day I owned a FX 9590, and based on first-hand experience, I can say that Intel had much better offerings. AMD chips such as the 8350 did offer more quote-unquote cores at a lower price point, but the 4790 had better single-threaded performance and overall efficiency. Also, AMD got sued over falsely advertising its FX CPU, so Intel was definitely a better choice. But why should you choose it today? I'm sure with enough time and patience you could snag a better deal on Facebook Marketplace, but if you're looking for a budget system you could build today, this isn't a bad option, mainly because everything about this CPU is cheap. It uses DDR3 memory, which is 2 generations old, and 8GB sticks are a dime a dozen. It also uses socket 1150, and compatible motherboards are surprisingly affordable. Back in 2014, the 4790 cost $300, but I bought mine used. It was pulled from a working computer, and I got it for $40. Throw on a hypothetical $35 for a motherboard, another $35 for 16 gigs of RAM, $70 for a 1060, and you've got a capable gaming system for $180. Personally, I got it so I could finally upgrade the test bench PC I use for this channel. Previously, I was using a dual-core i3-4130, but thanks to the first YouTube check, I was finally able to upgrade. So consider subscribing so I can buy more computer parts to make videos on. The test system we'll be using is a ProDesk 400G1 with 16 gigs of RAM and Windows 10 running on a 7200 RPM hard drive. For the GPU, we'll be using an RTX 3060 with an external power supply. The 3060 or the aforementioned 1060 does have the potential to create a bottleneck with such an old CPU, but for testing purposes, I wanted to make sure that the 4790 was the limiting factor and I was pushing it as hard as possible. So without further ado, let's see how it holds up in 2023. As some of you may know, I'm still a big fan of Windows 7. It's a character flaw, but this time I ended up using Windows 10, which actually ran effortlessly. I was downloading all sorts of softwares and games at the same time, and the 4790 never slowed down or even broke a sweat. But I wanted it to break a sweat, so I ran Cinebench to see just how hot I can get this poor processor. And it got hot. So hot, in fact, that it thermal throttled and was unable to boost above 3.6 GHz, only pulling 66 out of its 84-watt TDP. It ended up getting a multi-core score of 4,277 in Cinebench R23, which is slower than other benchmarks I found online. So make sure to pair it with a beefy cooler. I'll definitely be upgrading mine. But even though it wasn't running at its full potential, in-game performance was still amazing. Hey, quick side note, the screen tearing wasn't actually this bad. My capture card is just a piece of garbage, so keep that in mind. In 1440p with the medium preset, it got an average of 55 FPS with a minimum of 14 and 1% lows of 44. It was very stable, there was virtually no screen tearing, and that was all without DLSS. DLSS. With DLSS set to performance, the average frame rate jumped up to 66 and the other metrics stayed roughly the same. It did get a little bit warm at 83 degrees Celsius and 87% utilization, but this CPU came out 9 years ago and it's making relatively light work of Cyberpunk. But can it run Crysis? Crysis Remastered, that is. Once again, I ran this one in 1440p and with the auto optimize feature chose to set the quality settings to the high spec. In the woods it was getting about 60 FPS but dropped to about 45-50 when approaching a shoreline with buildings. It ended up getting an average frame rate of 53 FPS, a minimum of 7, and 1% lows of 33. But the frame time also ranged from about 5 to 21 milliseconds and there was noticeable screen tearing. So the 4790 can run it, but you might not want the high spec. Next up, we have Riot Games' unholy combination of CSGO and Overwatch, Valorant. Now, this game is very well optimized, and our system made light work of it with an average frame rate of 174 FPS and 1440p with the highest settings. The CPU also sat at about 70 degrees Celsius and 73% utilization with a minimum frame rate of 23 and 1% lows of 90. Also, I destroyed this deathmatch lobby. A mid CSGO player can win against 90% of Valorant players, and you can quote me on that. However, in 1440p, CSGO, the objectively better game, got an even higher frame rate with an average of 195 with the medium setting. In the recording, the game does look a little bit stuttery, but I can assure you that that was just my lightning fast internet being exceptionally stable. The 4790 sat at about 71 degrees Celsius with 50% utilization and got a minimum frame rate of 28. Honestly, the performance was really good and I forgot I was benchmarking it for a minute. So with a 4790, you can live out all your Silver 3 dreams. Afterwards was Halo Infinite. Now, I don't actually know what resolution I ran this game in. I ended up using a $30 4K capture card I got off of AliExpress or something, and I couldn't change the resolution lower than 4K. So I'm pretty sure it's in 4K even though I was using a 1440p monitor. With the low settings and ray tracing turned off, it got an average frame rate of 59 FPS, a minimum of 31, and 1% lows of 43. This was also a much more GPU than CPU dependent game, with the 4790 sticking at about 40 to 50%, but it ran well. Following that was GTA 5, and in 1440p with the high settings got an average frame rate of 88 FPS, a minimum of 47, and 1% lows of 59. It was exceptionally stable, with no screen tearing, and it was able to boost to 4 GHz. It also performed about as well as my $2,000 laptop. In fact, the performance of this abused Pro Desk was too good, like much better than I expected, and I'm gonna make a follow-up video comparing the two. Next up was Beamng.Drive. I also ran this one in 1440p, this time with the normal settings, got an average frame rate of 83 FPS, a minimum of 30, and 1% lows of 60. The 4790 was at about 75 degrees Celsius, and you can see it boosting in the top left overlay. Honestly, there's not much to say about this one. It's a fun little simulation game, and if you're on the fence about buying it, I can definitely recommend it. Warzone was next, and in 1440p with the high settings and DLSS set to performance, the game ran like shit. It was stuttery nonsense, and the CPU was thermal throttling at 90% utilization. But I'm still gonna blame the hard drive. Essentially, the game ran well when standing still, but when you moved, performance tanked, which is probably because this stupid ass 50 megabyte per second hard drive couldn't keep up. I bought an SSD for further testing, which should arrive in about a week, but for now I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and call it inconclusive. The last and final problematic game we had was PUBG. I mean, it ran fine and got an average frame rate of 88 in 1440p, but I was the problem actually. I don't know which quality settings it was using. I'm assuming it was using the low preset given the game's appearance, but I legitimately could not find the graphics quality options. But either way, it was competitively playable as long as you don't die within a minute of landing. So what just happened? This CPU just performed way better than I actually expected. Like, I was anticipating most games to be playable, but it destroyed these benchmarks. Especially games like Cyberpunk or Halo Infinite, I did not see that coming at all. I also didn't anticipate just how much heat this thing would output. The 4130 that was previously in here had a TDP of only 54 watts, and this one was only using 30 more, yet it seemed to get way hotter. Maybe I just need to use more thermal paste, but eventually I do want to get a better cooler for this system. Quick tangent here, but the FX 9590, which was AMD's fastest CPU at the time, had a TDP of 220 watts. It used over twice as much power and was worse in just about every way. I don't know why I bought it, and I don't know why someone bought it off me. Also, I kinda downplayed just how bad the hard drive was. It says 7200 RPM, but god, I have written down that it is so motherfucking slow, it makes IDE seem like NVMe. In fact, while downloading games, it bottlenecked my internet and can only handle 4 megabytes per second. I have an SSD on the way that I'll be throwing into this system, but that's for a later video. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider leaving a like or subscribing because it genuinely helps me out. If you want to join the community, there's a link to the official J&I Discord server in the description alongside a few donation methods that directly support the channel. If you have any questions or related comments, then leave them below and I'll be sure to respond to them. That's about it. Have a great day. Bye.